Okay, this morning in Genesis, this is our 32nd week in the book of Genesis. We started this in February. We're continuing right up till Christmas. We're going to finish this book this year. And we are today starting the final story. The rest of the book of Genesis is one story. We're starting that last story this morning. And the last story shares with it the same two themes that every story so far has shared. There are two themes that are woven throughout Genesis. Every single story has these two threads running through them. The first is that we live in a broken world. How many of you have noticed that? We live in a broken world. Now, this isn't the world that we saw at the beginning of Genesis. This isn't the world that God created. God did not create the world broken. But because of sin, death and brokenness and disease and sickness and lies and deception and broken relationships, all of this has come into the world as Adam and Eve, our first parents, chose not to live under God, not to live under His authority, not to live under His rule, but to go their own way. And with that came the brokenness. And so we've seen story after story the brokenness of sin, the brokenness of relationships, the brokenness of a father and a son, and lying and deception. And we've seen it. It's been on display. But the second theme that has been masterfully woven throughout Genesis for us is that even though we are broken, even though humanity has chosen to go away from God, God has chosen to pursue humanity. And so over and over and over again, what we've seen is that God is the one who is seeking and saving the lost. God is the one who is pursuing those who are running from Him. God is the one who is coming to bring healing to brokenness, to bring healing to broken relationships, to bring life where there is death. And so as we get to this final story that we'll be taking several weeks to cover, we're going to see these two themes just come into focus and clarity like we have not even seen to this point in Genesis. That we live in a broken world, but that God and His plan and His purpose for good, for healing, for restoration, for forgiveness, for salvation, His plan will stand. His plan will be accomplished. And this final story is like the rest of Genesis. And it's not just this book of Genesis that's this way, it's the whole book of the Bible. And really, ultimately, it's the story of our lives as well. It's the story of humanity. That as God creates, we run away, but He pursues and brings healing. And it's our story. It is the human story. So Genesis chapter 37 and verse 1. It tells us that Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. Remember, Jacob took his time getting to Canaan, and he took his time obeying God, and he sort of delayed his obedience and went his own way for a while, and it didn't go well for his family. But finally, we see here that Jacob has obeyed God. He's gone to the place that God told him to go. It says, these are the generations of Jacob. And so what Moses, who's writing this, is telling us is that the story is going to shift now from Jacob's life now to his descendants, now to his sons. Jacob had 12 sons. And it's going to zero in on his 11th son, Joseph. I'm sure Jacob had a hard time keeping track of his 12 sons too. Joseph the 11th, it says, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. Jacob had 4 wives. That is a complicated family tree. That is a complicated Thanksgiving dinner, let me tell you what. 4 wives, 13 kids. He had 1 daughter, 12 sons. It was all mixed up. He only loved one of his wives, Rachel. The wife he loved had died already. And Joseph is the firstborn son of the wife he loved, Rachel. So Jacob loves Joseph more than any of his other children. And so he's out there, Joseph is out there working with his brothers in the field, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. How many of you like tattletales? It's not a quality that we highly esteem in our culture, is it? No, it's not. Joseph goes and tattles on his brothers. Verse 3 tells us that Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. So Jacob is showing this unmerited favor to Joseph. He loves him more. He's not afraid to show that he loves him more. He gives him this coat of many colors. Other Bibles translate this as a royal robe, this prestigious garment. And it tells us that Joseph didn't save his royal robe or his coat of many colors. He didn't save this for special occasions. He wore it all the time. He wore it to breakfast. He wore it to lunch. It was his royal PJs. He just sitting there in his royal robe. It'd be like you wearing a tuxedo all the time. Show up to play basketball with your friends and you got your tuxedo on. You know? This is little Joseph, 17. He's 17. It says when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. Not they disliked him, not they thought he was kind of annoying, not, they tolerated him. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. They couldn't even say a kind word to him. Every time they saw him, they just exploded. They hated his guts. What a lovely family we have here. This is not the Brady Bunch here. This is a blended family, but it is not the story of a lovely lady and all the rest of that. This is a domestic disaster. Now, Joseph had a dream, and he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. So it's not as if they had room to grow in their hate for him, and they're growing in their hate when they hear Joseph's dream. I could just see Joseph coming to the breakfast table, wearing his coat of many colors, his royal PJs, and hey guys, as they're eating their Fruit Loops, guess what I dreamed about last night? He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us?" They understood what his dream meant, that they would one day bow down to Joseph. "Are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams. How many times have they hated him? 3 times already their hatred for Joseph is growing and growing. But Joseph is not done dreaming. Verse 9. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. You guys like my first dream so much. Let me tell you about this second dream I had last night. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." I could just see them eating their oatmeal, and they just stop. The oatmeal's like clopping down, clop, clop. Verse 10, when he told it to his father and to his brothers, there's his dad just like, "What are you saying, son?" His father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Finally, Jacob loves this kid, but I can imagine him just sitting there hearing these dreams, hearing these stories, thinking, "Oh my goodness, what have I created? What sort of little robe of many colors monster have I created here?" Thinking, I'm going to bow down to him. So he rebukes him. 3 times it is mentioned that this hatred among Joseph's brothers is growing, is increasing. And so the question is, what is going to come of Joseph and his brothers who hate him? Now the story continues. I'm going to summarize the next portion for you. That Jacob's 10 older brothers, get sent out about 50 or 60 miles away to go and pasture the flock. Jacob was a very wealthy man. He had many flocks, herds, sheep, and he sends his 10 sons out to go and to work in his business, his family business. How many of you grew up working in the family business? Anybody? Okay. There's some interesting dynamics in play, that are at play in family businesses. And so the 10 go out, but he doesn't send Joseph out to work. Joseph is 17. Is 17 enough to do something? Pasturing a flock? Well, of course it is. But he lets Joseph stay at home, walking around in his royal PJs, living in dad's basement playing Xbox, okay? Joseph doesn't have to go out to work. All the other brothers, they get kicked out of the nest. You got to go to work. You got to go to college. You got to find your own way. How many of you had a little brother that didn't have to do that, or sister? How many of you were that little brother or sister? The Bible is so applicable to our lives today. It's amazing. Joseph is at home. So after a period of time, Jacob comes to Joseph and he says, "Hey, Joseph, I've got a great idea. You know how you like to tattle on your brothers? Well, I want to send you to go and spy on them for me. Go see what they're doing, and then you come back and tell me how it's going." And Joseph says, "That's a great idea, Dad. I would love to go and do this for you." And so Jacob, or Israel, sends Joseph to go and spy on his brothers and bring him a report. I could just see him, "Yes, Dad. Oh, I'll be happy to do that. Oh, for sure. I'll see what they're doing." Verse 18 tells us that before he even got to them, they look out and they see him coming. How did they see him coming? Well, his coat of many colors is just flashing everywhere. They could just see him, He didn't even put on camouflage to go and spy him out. He wore his royal robe, his tuxedo. Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Well, that escalated pretty quickly. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." We live in a broken world. We live in a world where sin is at work, even in God's people. Where if we're not careful, we can allow our hearts to be filled with rage, hatred. That's what Joseph's brothers were feeling. But what about bitterness, resentment, discontentment? All of the things that happen in this world can affect our hearts. We have to guard our hearts. The writer of Proverbs says, "Guard your heart, because from it flows the issues of life." Everything from life flows from your heart. Jacob's brothers had let some bad stuff into their heart. And here they decide that they're going to take action on what they've been feeling, that they're going to rise up and they're going to kill their younger brother. They say, "We'll see what comes of his dreams." Yeah, right. I'm going to bow down to Joseph. We'll see about that. This reminds us of the first two brothers, doesn't it? The first two brothers in the Bible, Cain and Abel. One raises his fist against the other and slaughters them. Cain killed Abel. This is their plan. They've planned to kill their brother and to cover it up. Now, the next section of the story tells us that Reuben, the oldest brother, knows that this is wrong, and so he comes up with a plan to save Joseph. He comes to his brothers and he says, "Look, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him into this pit, and then we can decide what to do with him later." Reuben, his plan was to go back and get Joseph and save him and restore him to their father Jacob. That was what Reuben's plan was. And so he convinces his brothers to just, let's not kill him right now. Let's just throw him in this pit for a while. Maybe we'll teach him a lesson, and then we'll decide what to do with him later. So he convinces them. They throw them into this pit. And as they sit down to eat dinner, this merchant of caravanning merchants come through, and Judah has an entrepreneurial moment. Judah sees these traders coming through, these merchants, these wanderers, these gypsies, and Judah says, you know what, I think we could maybe make some money off this kid Joseph. So Judah has this bright idea. He's the entrepreneur in the group. And it says in verse 26, Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother in our own flesh. I mean, guys, he is our brother. I mean, come on, guys. We might as well make money off of him, you know. And his brothers listened to him. Yeah, you're right. Why waste it? Why waste the life when we can make a little bit of money off of him? Okay, sounds like a good idea. His brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by. I don't know if they put a sign on Joseph, you know, a little Sharpie for sale. I don't know how they did this, but they passed Joseph off on them. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Now, 20 shekels of silver in today's weight is 7.7 ounces. If you get on Google and find out how much silver is worth today, you know, precious metals, they go up and they go down, but they track with the economy. So silver today in our economy, 7.7 ounces, if I did my math right, and I think I did, I checked it twice, is $120. They sold Joseph for $120. Once you split that 10 ways, you're left with like $12. You could barely eat a number one at McDonald's today for $12. They sell Joseph for this incredibly small sum of money. They're just happy to get rid of him. They're just happy to see this troublemaker go. And so, Reuben comes. Remember, Reuben, his older brother, he was going to come and save Joseph. So he comes to the pit. He looks down to pull Joseph up, and Joseph's gone. Reuben, I don't know where he was. I don't know if he went back to work while they were eating dinner, but he was not there when they sold him. So Reuben, you know, that the pit of his stomach falls out. He is distraught because he knows that as the oldest brother, he is the one who is responsible. And so he goes to his brothers like, what happened to Joseph? And they're like, great, we had a great plan. Judah, man, he just came up with this idea, and we sold him into slavery. We didn't kill him like he didn't want us to. Reuben's, what? I could just imagine them being like, yeah, here's your cut. And he's like, well, how much is it? $12. What? You sold our brother for $120 for 20 shekels of silver. And so they continue with the plan that they had said. They took Joseph's royal robe, his coat of many colors. They slaughtered a lamb. They dipped that robe in blood. They tore it all up. And then they sent it to their father. And when they sent it to their dad, they sent it with the message, is this your son's robe? Not, is this Joseph's robe? Is this our brother's robe? Is this your son's robe? Now, they are attempting to deceive Jacob. Remember who this is. Remember who Jacob was. Who are they trying to trick? Who are they trying to deceive? But the deceiver, Jacob, the trickster, the liar. This has been Jacob's MO his whole life. And now his sons are trying to deceive him. Now, I have to remind you that Jacob is the one who slaughtered a goat and used his brother's robe, his brother's garments, to disguise himself to go in and deceive his father. You remember that story? Jacob is the one who used his brother's clothes to deceive his father, who used a slaughtered goat to deceive his father. And here now, Jacob's sons try to deceive their father with their brother's robe and a goat's blood. Do you reap what you sow? Ladies and gentlemen, do you reap what you sow? This is the same thing that Jacob did is now being done to him. In this life, we reap what we sow. Jacob believes the lie. It's very convincing. He believes him. He goes, my son is dead. He believes his favorite son, the son he loves the most, the son that he favored above all else, that his son has died. In verse 33, it tells us Jacob's response. It says he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without a doubt torn to pieces." You hear the heart of a father that loved his son breaking. Man, how big of jerks were Joseph's brothers to watch their dad spiral into this depression, thinking that his prized son was dead. Jacob tore his garments. He tears his clothes. He puts on rags. And he mourned for his son, it says, many days. It says that all his children came to comfort him. Dad is going to be okay. Hey, there's 12 more of us, I mean, there's a lot of us here. You still got some other sons, Dad. They came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "No, I shall go down to the grave to my son in mourning." He says, "I'm not going to stop mourning until the day I die. I'm not getting over this. I'm not putting this behind me. This is me for the rest of my life." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. What a dark day. What a dark day. What a day of sin. What a day of evil. I can only imagine how Jacob felt. I can't even imagine how Jacob felt. Believing that his son that he had sent out had been killed on the way. Jacob is the one that said, "Hey, Joseph, I've got this job for you. I want you to go." He would have held himself responsible for his son's death. And I can only imagine how Joseph would have felt. Sitting there at the bottom of the pit, having obeyed his father, I would be thinking, "God, where are you in this? Lord, where are you?" Wondering if his brothers are going to get up and slit his throat. They've heard the plan. He's heard the plan. "God, where are you here? Are you there? God, do you see what I'm going through? I'm down here. Hello? Do you see me here in this pit?" Where is God in all of this story? "God, I've had these dreams. I've had these visions. I've believed that they were from you, that this was going to be accomplished in my life. And now it looks as though those dreams are dead. Now it's never going to come to pass." And all of us have felt this way in this broken world. Have you felt that way? "God, where are you in the midst of my trial, in the midst of my storm? I feel like I'm at the bottom of the pit and there's no one to help me out." And it doesn't feel like you are there. The truth is, all of us have experienced this pain, this question, this wondering. We've all been lied to. We've all been cheated. We've all been deceived. We've all been misled. We've all had people in our lives who made a promise to us that they broke. We've had those closest to us walk away. Those who were supposed to protect us and care for us and look out for us were the ones who did us the most harm. We've all been sinned against. We've all been, not all of us, many of us, have been abused, suffered great harm at the hands of those who were to love us and protect us. Physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. And this is life in the broken world. And these are the darkest days. These are the seasons where it feels like God is not there, where God doesn't hear, where our prayers don't even hit the ceiling, where God is absent. Have you had a day like that? Have you had a season like that? It's a season of darkness. The season of evil's been done. There's been a death. Where are you, God, in my life? You prayed a prayer that's like, God, where are you? God, I don't understand. God, this doesn't make sense to me. How could you allow this in my life? That's Joseph's prayer at the bottom of the pit. God, how could you possibly be involved in this? I remember for me, that day was the day my dad passed away. It was a dark day. It was a day of wondering. It was a day of questioning. It led to a season of crying out to God, but not feeling or hearing like he was there. And this is why I love the story of Joseph. Because even though it doesn't seem like God is there, even though it seems like God is missing from this story completely, if we look closely, we see he's right there. God is the only one who can give a dream that foretells the future. God is the only one that can give those kinds of dreams. And as we watch this story, as it continues to unfold, we will see that God's plan is fulfilled, that Joseph's brothers eventually come and bow down to him. And not just that that dream was fulfilled and that they bowed to him, but God is going to use Joseph sovereignly, providentially, to work salvation for Joseph's entire family. But Joseph couldn't have known that sitting at the bottom of the pit. This undoubtedly was Joseph's worst day to this point in his life. But here's what I want you to see. Joseph's worst day is actually the first day of his dreams becoming fulfilled. Joseph's worst day is actually the first day of the plan of God being fulfilled in Joseph's life. Those who thought they were working against God, those who thought they were working against Joseph's dreams, those who thought that they were in control, they proved to only be tools in the hands of God to bring about his good plan and purpose. And this is the good news. This is what comforts our hearts and our souls in this broken world, is that God can even use the evil deeds of our fellow man to bring about his perfect plan. We are comforted with the knowledge that God, not causing evil, but that he can redeem it. He can use it. He can take it. He can turn it. He can bring resurrection to where there was death. And we only have to look to Jesus to see the great example of the one who was wrongfully betrayed, for the one who was without sin, for the one who those closest to him betrayed him, lied about him, deserted him, renounced him. That those he came to serve, his brothers in the Jewish faith, they're the ones who took him, like Joseph's brothers, and turned him over to Gentiles, turned Jesus over to the Romans. That Jesus ultimately suffered and died the most excruciating death, the death on the cross. Betrayed by his own, suffered for doing no wrong. Yet we see in Jesus, God taking what the enemy meant for evil and working it for our good. You see, God does not cause evil. God does not cause suffering. It is sin. It is the human heart. It is wickedness that brings these things into the world. But what God does is when we come to him and we bring him our brokenness, he, like Jesus, takes our suffering and he gives it meaning. and he gives it purpose. The suffering that you experience, the hurt you experience, the evil you experience in this life, it is not meaningless. There is a purpose. God will work it for your good. So what do we do on those darkest days when it seems like God is absent? What do we do? You know, if you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. You're not alone. Jesus on the cross, what did he cry out? My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus knew what it felt like to be abandoned by God. He knew what it felt like to cry out to God and feel like he wasn't there. He knew what it felt like to be surrounded by darkness. And so what do? Well, we look to Jesus. What did he do? He persevered in faith. He persevered in faith. Even though it didn't all make sense on the outside, he chose to trust in God. What did Joseph do? He persevered in faith. He chose to trust in God. This is why I love the scripture. This is why I love these stories. David writes in Psalms 119, he says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. What we need in the darkest of times is the word of God. When we can't see, you know, when it's dark outside, you need a light, you need something to shine. When the darkness comes in, when evil encroaches upon you, what you need is a light. What you need is something to light the way and to light the path. And for us, that is God's word. It lights the way. It shows us that for Joseph, God had a plan. It shows us that for Jesus, God had a plan. And what that tells us is that for me and you, God has a plan. Amen. And so we keep the faith. We choose to put our faith in God. We choose to believe God and in his word, trusting him to work it all out in the end. And in the end, he does. In the end, he does. My story is that in that dark season of my life, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to turn. And so I turned to this book. I turned to the Word. I turned to the Word. And God used his word to bring healing to my heart, to bring healing to my soul, to shine a light, to illuminate my path. The pain didn't go away. I still hurt. I still miss my dad. I still have the scars from what happened. But what it did do is it gave my pain meaning. God showed me that suffering and evil, even though he doesn't cause it, he can redeem it. He can redeem it. And just as God's redeemed my life and my family and the story of our life and the story of this church, God can redeem you. And God will redeem you. Amen.